Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. I was wrong. Tonight, let me tell you what happened on Flight 214, Denver to Boston, 6:10 departure, first class filling fast. The gate area buzzed with the last rush of an evening departure, rolling bags clattering over tile, an agent's voice calling boarding groups over the intercom. Amara Reeves reached row 2 with her boarding pass already open on her phone, a plain black tote over one shoulder, her natural curls pulled back from a long night of slide decks and spreadsheets. 29 years old, and for the last 6 years, the operations lead at a clean energy logistics startup her father had spent 2 decades building from nothing. She'd flown this route more times than she could count, always aiming for the same seat when she could get it. 2A, window. A man was already sitting in it. Bradley Finch, mid-50s, gray suit, a leather duffel wedged into the overhead bin above the seat. He had a laptop open on the tray table and a glass of sparkling water at his elbow, arranged with the easy confidence of a man who assumed possession settled every question before it was asked. "Excuse me," Amara said, holding up her phone. "My boarding pass says 2A. Bradley glanced at the screen without really looking at it. "I've had this seat for years. There's probably been some mix-up on your end." "There's no mix-up. I booked it 3 weeks ago." She kept her voice level, the tone she used in board meetings when someone talked over her numbers. "Can you check your current pass?" "That's the crew's job, not mine," he said, already turning back to his screen, dismissing her while still keeping her standing in the aisle. A flight attendant named Carol Doyle arrived, drawn by the stalled line forming behind Amara, already calculating a delay in her head before she'd even heard either side. She looked at Bradley first, the way people naturally look toward the person who seems settled, established, unbothered. "Mr. Finch, is there a problem?" "Duplicate seat assignment," Bradley said smoothly, not missing a beat. "I've been in 2A the whole flight." Carol turned to Amara. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Amara handed over her phone. Carol checked it, then asked for her ID. Amara provided that too, unzipping her tote to retrieve it. Then Carol asked for the confirmation number, and when she'd purchased the ticket, and whether she was a member of the airline's loyalty program. Each answer produced another question, one small hurdle replaced immediately by the next. Bradley, meanwhile, sat untouched, his own boarding pass never once requested, his laptop still humming quietly on the tray table. A woman in 3C lowered her book just enough to watch. Nobody said anything yet, but the cabin had gone quiet in that particular way cabins do when everyone is paying attention and pretending not to. Amara had reviewed the seat map on her phone the night before, the way she always did, a small habit from years of unpleasant surprises. She noticed she was one of only 2 black passengers in the entire first-class cabin that morning. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition, the same instinct that let her read a spreadsheet for hidden risk before anyone else in the room noticed it. Amara had seen this play out before, in hotel lobbies, in investor meetings, in rooms where she'd built the numbers herself and still had to prove she belonged in them. She didn't raise her voice. She'd learned a long time ago that raising it only gave people a reason to stop listening, a reason to call her difficult instead of right. "You've checked my identity 4 times, she said to Carol. "Have you checked his boarding pass once?" Carol hesitated. The question landed somewhere she hadn't expected to be pushed. "Mr. Finch is a longtime member of our program. That's not an answer to what I asked." Bradley exhaled sharply and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone with the irritated air of a man being forced to entertain something beneath him. He opened a screenshot, not the live app, an old image of a boarding pass with his name and seat, 2A, printed clearly across the top. There, settled. Amara stepped closer, not toward him, but toward the screen itself. A thin strip of text sat cropped at the top of the image, a fragment of a notification he hadn't quite managed to hide before saving it. "Seat assignment updated." She looked at him. He clicked the screen dark, half a second too fast, the kind of reflex that gives away more than any word could. Carol saw it too, her eyes catching the same fraction of a second Amara had. This time, instead of trusting the screenshot, she pulled up the live reservation system on her own tablet, and the truth appeared in plain, uncomplicated text. Seat 2A, Amara Reeves. Seat 4C, Bradley Finch. The aircraft had been swapped for a smaller model the night before, and every passenger's assignment had shifted along with it. Bradley had opened the notification. He had acknowledged it. He had boarded anyway, betting that no one behind him would fight for the seat once he was already comfortably sitting in it. "Mr. Finch," Carol said carefully, glancing between the tablet and his face, "your current assignment is 4C. "That's an aisle seat," Bradley said, as if she'd suggested something absurd, something beneath his consideration entirely. "I need the window to work." "I understand," Carol said, and something in her voice softened toward him in a way it hadn't softened toward Amara through 4 full rounds of questioning. Amara felt that shift land, quiet and unmistakable, the exact moment she'd been braced for, without wanting to admit it. "You confirmed the seat is mine," she said. "Why are we still discussing this?" Carol didn't answer directly. Instead, she offered Amara 4B, an equivalent first-class seat 2 rows back, along with a handful of bonus miles for the trouble, the kind of tidy compromise designed to end a conversation rather than resolve it fairly. "You're asking the person who followed the rules to move," Amara said, "so the person who ignored them doesn't have to." Carol's mouth tightened, caught between two people she needed to get seated before the door closed. "We're trying to find the least disruptive solution," she said. "Moving the passenger who followed the rules isn't the least disruptive solution," Amara said. "It's the easiest one for you." Bradley stood, filling the narrow space of the aisle, his voice climbing for the first time that morning. "This is exactly the problem. She won't take a perfectly reasonable alternative." A man 2 rows back groaned and checked his watch. "Can we please just move on? I've got a tight connection." A woman across the aisle, an older passenger with sharp eyes and a paperback open on her lap, spoke without looking up from her page. "She has the valid ticket. He doesn't. That's not complicated." The supervisor arrived a moment later, a man named Dale Whitfield, radio in hand, already primed by whatever shorthand version of events had reached him through the galley. He didn't ask Amara for her side first, didn't glance at her phone or the tablet Carol was still holding. "Ma'am, I need you to take the alternate seat, or we'll need to involve security." "What safety rule have I violated?" Amara asked, keeping both hands visible, her voice never rising above the level she'd started with. Dale's jaw tightened. "You're refusing a reasonable crew instruction. You're asking me to give up the seat printed on my ticket because another passenger prefers it. That's not a safety instruction. That's a request, and I'm declining it." Bradley, sensing the tide turning against him in the eyes of the watching cabin, played his last card, the one he seemed to have been holding in reserve the whole time. "Look at her," he said, gesturing loosely in Amara's direction. "Does she look like someone who normally sits in 2A? The cabin went silent in a different way this time, heavier, more uncomfortable, the kind of silence that makes people suddenly very interested in their own hands. Nobody needed him to explain what he meant. Dale didn't correct him, didn't even flinch. He simply reached for the handset near the galley. "This is Dale Whitfield on Flight 214. We have a non-compliant passenger in first class, requesting airport security at the door." He hadn't said Amara had a valid ticket. He hadn't said Bradley was in the wrong seat. He hadn't mentioned the old screenshot, or the notification still visible in its corner, or the comment that had just gone unanswered in front of 40 strangers. A woman standing beside her own reservation had just become, in the span of one phone call, a security concern. A young man in row 3, Owen Castillo, had his phone raised, recording quietly from an angle wedged between 2 seatbacks. He'd started out of pure curiosity, the instinct to capture something that might get attention online. But when Bradley asked whether Amara looked like someone who belonged in 2A, the idea of using it for a clever caption felt suddenly cheap. He kept recording anyway, unedited, no music, nothing cropped, because some part of him understood that the footage mattered more than any clever framing he could put around it. Airport Security Officer Teresa Nunez stepped onto the aircraft a few minutes later, calm, unhurried, taking in the raised phones, the blocked aisle, Bradley seated by the window, Amara standing with both hands visible, exactly as she'd been standing before Dale ever picked up the handset. "Has she threatened anyone?" Teresa asked Dale, not even glancing at Amara yet. "No direct threat. Has she violated a safety instruction?" "She's refused to move seats." "Was the move required for safety?" Dale's silence answered before he did. "No," he admitted, the word coming out smaller than the rest of his sentences had been. Teresa turned to Amara. "Do you have a valid ticket for this flight?" Amara held up her phone. "First class, seat 2A. Teresa checked it, then turned to Bradley. "Sir, I need your current boarding pass, not a screenshot." Bradley opened the live app slowly, reluctantly, his fingers hesitating over the screen. Seat 4C appeared beneath his name, the update time-stamped the night before, impossible to argue with now that someone in a uniform was actually asking to see it properly. "So it became complicated," Teresa said, her tone even, when the wrong passenger was threatened with removal. While the cabin absorbed that, a tablet in Dale's hand buzzed with an alert he clearly hadn't expected. He read it once, then again, the color draining slightly from his face. "Hold aircraft door, corporate review pending." Bradley noticed the shift immediately, his earlier bravado curdling into something closer to alarm. "What is that? Who did you call?" he asked Amara, suspicion creeping into his voice for the first time that morning. "I didn't call anyone," Amara said. "I sent the flight number and the situation to my company's legal team 20 minutes ago. the way I would for any other business dispute. What happens next isn't up to me. What Bradley didn't know, and what the gate supervisor was only now discovering through a rapidly escalating chain of internal messages, was that Amara's father, Desmond Reeves, founder of Solvec Energy, was 2 floors up in the very same airport, finishing a meeting with the airline's executive team on a joint sustainable fuel partnership worth close to $400 million, a deal that would put Solvec's technology into half the airline's fleet within 5 years. Amara wasn't flying to Boston for leisure. She was flying to finalize the engineering rollout on the other end of that same partnership, carrying a laptop bag full of documents Bradley had never once thought to ask about. She hadn't planned to mention any of it. She'd built her career specifically trying not to need to. Solvec Energy had started as a 2-person operation in a rented lab space, and Amara had spent her first 3 years there, answering to engineers twice her age, who assumed she was an assistant, until she corrected them, again and again, until the correction stopped being necessary. Her father had offered to put her name on the company from the start. She'd said no, taken the smallest title available, and worked her way up through every department until nobody could question what she'd earned. She wasn't about to let one man in seat 2A undo 6 years of that in a single sentence. Word reached Desmond Reeves through his assistant, Priya Anand, who'd been monitoring the flight status out of habit more than concern, a small ritual she kept for every trip her boss's daughter took. Amara rarely missed a scheduled check-in, and when the notification came through, flagged passenger dispute, Flight 214, Desmond excused himself from the negotiating table without raising his voice or explaining why, simply stepping into the hallway with his phone already at his ear. He didn't call the gate. He didn't demand anyone's job. He called Amara directly and asked her to put him on speaker. "Is your boarding pass valid for seat 2A?" he asked, calm and precise, the same tone he used when reviewing a contract line by line. "Yes." "Does the other passenger have a current boarding pass for that seat?" "No. His live reservation shows 4C. Has anyone threatened you or made physical contact?" "No." Desmond's voice, still even, still unhurried, carried through the cabin speaker for everyone nearby to hear. "My name is Desmond Reeves. Amara is my daughter, but that isn't why her ticket is valid. Her ticket was valid before I ever got on this call." Bradley, who had gone quiet, sat up straighter in his seat, the fight draining visibly out of his posture. "Mr. Reeves, if I had known who she was, I would have handled this entirely differently." "Then you've just told me the actual problem," Desmond said, without a trace of satisfaction in his voice. "You think dignity depends on knowing the right last name." Nobody in the cabin spoke. Amara looked at Dale, who still held the tablet against his chest like it might shield him from what was coming. "My ticket was valid before this call," she said quietly. "Your decision was wrong before this call, too." Captain Andrew Reyes came back from the cockpit a few minutes later, having been briefed by ground control on the situation unfolding in his own cabin. He didn't apologize before he had the facts. He asked Amara for her live boarding pass, asked Bradley to open his current reservation instead of the old screenshot he kept reaching for, and reviewed the seat history on his own tablet, watching the timeline confirm exactly what everyone already suspected. There had never been 2 valid claims to that seat. There had only been 1 passenger willing to move and 1 who wasn't. He also noted quietly that the aircraft would not push back from the gate until the matter was fully resolved on the record, a small procedural fact that carried its own weight in that cabin, the flight itself grounded until the truth caught up with what had already happened. "Mr. Finch," Captain Reyes said, "your assigned seat is 4C. I need you to move there now." Bradley's face reddened. "After all this, you expect me to walk back through this cabin like I did something wrong?" "You occupied a seat that wasn't assigned to you," the captain said simply. No anger in it, just fact. "The record is clear. Bradley didn't move at first, his hands gripping the armrests as if letting go would mean admitting something out loud. When Officer Nunez stepped forward to escort him toward the exit, there was no struggle and no applause from the cabin, just the quiet shuffle of passengers pulling their legs aside to let him pass, and the low murmur of people who had just watched something get corrected instead of buried under a tidy company phrase. Dale and Carol were informed they'd be removed from the flight pending an internal review, standard process for any incident escalated to this level. A replacement crew was already being paged. Neither of them argued. Dale set the tablet down on the galley counter like it had gotten heavier in his hands over the last 20 minutes, and Carol stood near the door, avoiding everyone's eyes, including Amara's. Flight 214 left Denver 90 minutes late. Dale and Carol were both pulled from the flight pending review, not fired on the spot, not paraded for the cabin's satisfaction, just removed so an honest investigation could actually happen instead of a quiet cover story getting written up in a report nobody would ever see. Amara didn't ask for that. She'd only asked that the evidence be looked at, instead of buried under the word resolved. 6 weeks later, the airline released the findings. Crew members had applied inconsistent verification standards. They had prioritized a familiar customer's comfort over a valid reservation. They had escalated a legitimate dispute into a security matter the moment the passenger declined an unfair solution. The report also noted 2 earlier complaints from other passengers, quieter ones that had never made headlines, both involving similar patterns of unequal scrutiny that had been logged and then quietly closed without action. The airline announced a new policy requiring both passengers' current reservations to be checked side by side before any seat change could be requested. No screenshots, no loyalty status, no exceptions based on who seemed more likely to comply quietly and avoid a scene. Desmond didn't use the partnership as leverage to punish the airline. He paused the joint fuel rollout for 30 days, not to cancel it, but to make sure the airline's public commitments to fair treatment weren't just words printed near a boarding gate. When the review came back thorough and the new policy held up under scrutiny, the deal moved forward exactly as planned, on the same terms it had always been headed toward. Amara asked for one thing herself, that the airline never use her name, her image, or the incident in any marketing campaign. They'd already put "every passenger equal respect" on a banner near the gate. She wasn't going to let them turn a failure into an advertisement before they'd actually earned it. Bradley sent a written apology through his attorney a few weeks later. It focused mostly on the damage to his own reputation, the professional fallout from the video that had circulated, the discomfort of being recognized in airports afterward. Amara read it once and didn't respond. His concern still centered entirely on what had happened to him, and that told her everything she needed to know about whether anything inside him had actually shifted. Carol wrote to her separately, weeks after the internal review closed. She admitted she'd told herself she was keeping the peace, when really, she'd just assumed Amara would be the one more willing to bend. She apologized for confusing calm with weakness and confidence with credibility. Amara wrote back 2 short sentences. The letter mattered less than what Carol did the next time a passenger with no famous last name needed the same fairness. Let that person get it without a fight. Carol later transferred into a training role for new flight attendants, and she used the incident, anonymized, as a teaching example, the kind of case study she said she wished someone had shown her years earlier. Owen, the young man who had recorded the whole exchange, sent his footage directly to the airline's investigations team before posting anything publicly, unedited and complete, with confirmation numbers blurred out. His public version ran under 4 minutes and never mentioned Desmond Reeves by name until the very end, focusing instead on the repeated verification, the ignored screenshot, and the sentence about who belonged in seat 2A. The most shared comment underneath it wasn't celebration, it was a question. Why did her ticket only become believable once her father's name entered the conversation? Airline representatives declined to comment publicly on the specific incident, citing the ongoing internal review, though the policy announcement 6 weeks later answered the question more honestly than any statement could have. Months later, she boarded another flight on the same airline. A few rows ahead, an older man had settled into a window seat that wasn't his, explaining to a young woman that he always preferred that side of the cabin. A flight attendant checked both boarding passes side by side, calmly, without hesitation, the new protocol running exactly the way it was supposed to. "Your reservation shows 4C, sir," the attendant said. "Hers is 2A. I'll need you to move." He gathered his jacket and walked back without another word. No security call, no raised voices, no famous last name required to make it happen. Amara settled into her own seat and watched the ground crew move beneath the wing and thought that quiet, unremarkable correction meant more to her than any headline the first flight had generated. She'd never needed her father's name to deserve a seat she'd already paid for. She'd only needed someone willing to check the facts before deciding whose word counted. Desmond asked her once, on the phone that same evening, whether she wanted him to push the airline harder, to demand a public statement, or a bigger settlement, something with more weight behind it. She thought about Carol's fear of a complaint, Dale's practiced authority, Bradley's refusal to look at a boarding pass held right in front of him. "I want consequences strong enough to change behavior," she told her father, "not revenge strong enough to end the conversation." He was quiet for a moment, then told her that was harder to get right. She said that was exactly why it mattered. "I spoke with Ms. Reeves briefly at the gate that evening. I asked her what stayed with her most. She said it wasn't the apology, and it wasn't the policy change. It was the 20 minutes before anyone believed her, when a valid ticket in her own hand somehow wasn't enough on its own. She told me she still flies that same route sometimes, still asks for 2A when she can get it, not to prove anything to anyone, just because it's the seat she likes. At 35,000 feet, everyone wears the same seatbelt. It's character, not status, that truly separates us. Some passengers learn that the hard way, one boarding pass at a time, and some crews only learn it after they've been forced to look at the evidence they'd rather have skipped past. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. Thanks for flying with me tonight. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's another flight waiting.